Now, you might think that in a galaxy containing 847 distinct sentient species, each with their own delightful quirks like ritualistic cannibalism, hive mind tax evasion, or the Zeltharian habit of declaring war via interpretive dance, that keeping the peace would be, shall we say, challenging. You'd be absolutely right, of course. The Galactic Mediation Authority had given up trying to catalog all ongoing conflicts sometime around the third millennium, when the number exceeded the processing capacity of their quantum computers and caused what historians now call the Great Administrative Breakdown of 3847. But here's the fascinating thing about our sprawling cosmic neighborhood. Despite approximately 14,000 active territorial disputes, 62 different trade wars, and the ongoing philosophical debate about whether the Crelian method of reproduction technically counted as a war crime, there existed one universal constant. One rule that every species, from the microscopic dust wanderers to the continent-sized behemoths of Andros VII, understood with crystalline clarity. Don't make the humans angry. Not because humans were the strongest. The Gorvani could bench press a small moon. Not because they were the fastest. Quicksilver runners could traverse a solar system before you finished saying their name. Not even because they were the smartest, though they did have this annoying tendency to solve millennium-old mathematical theorems during their lunch breaks, usually while complaining about the cafeteria food. No, the reason was far more unsettling. Humans were creative. Specifically, they were creative when annoyed, and downright artistic when furious. Other species fought wars to win territory, resources, or breeding rights. Humans fought wars to make a point, and their points tended to be written in the ashes of civilizations that had foolishly assumed, surely they're not still upset about that little misunderstanding from 30 years ago. This unspoken understanding had ushered in what historians would probably call the golden age of galactic peace, if historians weren't too terrified to actually write about it. Trade flourished, cultural exchange bloomed, and the humans cheerfully exported everything from entertainment media to agricultural techniques, all while maintaining the galaxy's most modest military presence. How wonderfully civilized of them. Ambassador Kelvith Zorain, of the Altarian Diplomatic Corps, had spent the better part of his career studying this phenomenon, which made him uniquely qualified to recognize the particular shade of cosmic dread that washed over him when his communication array chimed with an emergency priority message at 0347 station time. The message header read, "Minor incident requiring immediate attention, classification, routine." In diplomatic parlance, minor incident typically meant catastrophic disaster that will reshape galactic politics, while routine was code for start updating your resume and consider a career change. Zorain's secondary stomach, a useful Altarian adaptation for processing both food and existential terror, immediately began producing stress enzymes. The message originated from Sector 7G, a historically unremarkable region of space known primarily for its agricultural colonies and the fact that nothing interesting ever happened there, which, given the source of his current anxiety, was probably about to change dramatically. Zorain activated his holographic display and began scrolling through the report. 3 paragraphs in, his primary stomach joined his secondary in producing stress enzymes. By the 5th paragraph, both his hearts had synchronized into what Altarian physicians called the rhythm of impending doom. The hegemony of Voss, apparently operating under the catastrophically mistaken belief that humans were too civilized to respond proportionally to provocation, had decided to resolve a minor territorial dispute in their traditionally direct fashion. They had obliterated New Aberdeen, a human agricultural colony, along with its 50,000 inhabitants, claiming the settlement violated some obscure provision of a treaty signed before humans had even achieved interstellar flight. Zorane's third heart, which typically only activated during mating season or when contemplating retirement, began beating for the first time in 6 years. The truly terrifying part wasn't the attack itself. Regrettably, such incidents occurred with depressing regularity throughout the galaxy. The terrifying part was the human response, or rather, the complete lack thereof. No emergency diplomatic communications, no military mobilizations, no angry demands for immediate reparations. Just silence. Zorane had been monitoring human communication channels for the past 18 hours, and the humans appeared to be going about their daily business with the same cheerful efficiency they displayed when discussing weather patterns or debating the optimal brewing temperature for their various caffeinated beverages. They were acting exactly like a species that had absolutely nothing to worry about, which, if you understood humans at all, was when you should start worrying about everything. The hegemony of Voss, bless their militaristic little hearts, had apparently never heard the human expression silence before the storm. Then again, they'd probably never heard most human expressions, which might explain why they were currently celebrating their decisive victory with traditional Vossian war chants, while the rest of the galaxy held its collective breath and waited for the other shoe to drop. Or in this case, the other several thousand shoes, likely equipped with antimatter laces. Zorane materialized his investigation files across his office's holographic array, each document floating in neat, color-coded terror. The attack on New Aberdeen had been textbook Vossian efficiency. Overwhelming force, minimal warning, maximum destruction. 17 Vossian dreadnoughts had emerged from hyperspace at 1400 local time, transmitted a 30-second ultimatum regarding illegal occupation of sovereign hegemony territory, then proceeded to turn a thriving agricultural world into a collection of radioactive craters. The Vossians had even filed the proper paperwork afterward, because apparently genocide required appropriate documentation for their bureaucratic records. How thoughtful of them! What made this particular war crime special wasn't its brutality. The galaxy had seen worse. What made it special was the target. New Aberdeen hadn't been a military installation or a strategic resource hub. It had been 47 farming communities, 3 universities, and a rather famous botanical garden that had been working on developing drought-resistant crops for distribution to struggling colonies throughout the sector. The humans had been trying to help people. The Vossians had killed them for it. Zorane's door chimed, and Captain Hendrix Mallory entered without waiting for permission, a distinctly human trait that other species found either charming or terrifying, depending on the circumstances. Today, Zorane found it absolutely terrifying. Mallory looked exactly like someone who had just received news that 50,000 of his people had been vaporized, perfectly calm, professionally polite, and wearing an expression of such serene composure that it made Zorane's skin crawl. The human military attaché settled into the chair across from Zorane's desk, with the fluid grace of a natural predator pretending to be domesticated. "Ambassador," Mallory said, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to discuss lunch plans. "I assume you've reviewed the situation report from Sector 7G. "Captain Mallory," Zorane replied carefully, "please accept my deepest condolences for your people's loss. The Altarian government stands ready to provide any assistance." "That's very kind." Mallory's smile was the sort that made small children hide behind their parents. "We appreciate the sentiment, but assistance won't be necessary." Zorane felt his stress enzymes shift into overdrive. "Captain, perhaps we should discuss appropriate diplomatic responses." The mediation authority could convene an emergency tribunal, or we could pursue economic sanctions through the Trade Regulation Council. Oh, we've already filed the appropriate diplomatic protests, Mallory interrupted, producing a datapad from his jacket. 17 different complaints, through 12 different bureaucratic channels, all properly formatted and submitted within the required timeframes. We're very thorough about paperwork. The way he said thorough made it sound like a threat. However, Mallory continued, certain elements within our government feel that diplomatic solutions may prove insufficient for addressing the scope of this particular misunderstanding. Zorain had been a diplomat long enough to recognize euphemisms. When humans called something a misunderstanding, they meant act of war. When they described their response as potentially insufficient, they meant someone was about to discover exactly why. The galaxy's most peaceful species maintained the most comprehensive military research and development programs in known space. Captain, Zorain said slowly, the Hegemony of Voss commands significant military resources. Their fleet comprises over 3,000 combat vessels, and their territorial holdings span 47 systems. Any direct confrontation would result in massive casualties on both sides. Mallory nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. A direct military confrontation would be wasteful, inefficient, and frankly beneath our standards for creative problem-solving. His smile widened slightly. Fortunately, we've never been particularly fond of direct confrontations. Somewhere in the back of Zorain's mind, a small voice began screaming. The humans were planning something elaborate, which meant the Hegemony of Voss was about to receive a comprehensive education in why elaborate was the most terrifying word in the human vocabulary. What exactly does your government have in mind? Zorain asked, though he wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know the answer. Nothing dramatic, Mallory replied, standing and straightening his uniform jacket. We're simply going to remind the hegemony why the galaxy's current peaceful equilibrium exists in the first place. He paused at the door, turning back with that same terrifying smile. After all, Ambassador, some lessons are too important to forget. After Mallory left, Zorain sat in his office for several minutes, staring at the holographic files still floating around his desk. Then he activated his emergency communication array and began composing a message to the Altarian High Command. Subject line: recommend immediate evacuation of all diplomatic personnel from Hegemony space. The humans were about to remind everyone why they were the galaxy's most peaceful species. The first sign that the Hegemony of Voss had made a career-ending mistake came exactly 72 hours after New Aberdeen's destruction, when every single one of their trade agreements simultaneously developed what economists would later describe as acute contractual complications. It started small, as human vengeance typically did. A shipping delay here, a regulatory inspection there, a few technical difficulties with hyperspace beacon maintenance that somehow affected only Vossian vessels. Nothing that couldn't be explained by ordinary bureaucratic inefficiency if you were the sort of person who believed in coincidences involving 47 different star systems across 12 sectors. Zorain watched the cascade unfold from his office, monitoring communication channels with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a master class in systematic destruction. The humans weren't just attacking Vossian infrastructure, they were performing surgery on it, carefully severing each connection that kept hegemony society functioning while leaving everything technically intact. It's beautiful, in a deeply disturbing way, he murmured to his assistant, Velix, who had been tracking the economic data streams. They're not breaking any laws. They're just interpreting them creatively. The Zeltharian Shipping Consortium, for instance, had discovered that their insurance policies contained a fascinating clause about elevated risk assessments in regions experiencing recent kinetic events. Purely coincidental that this clause had been added to their standard contracts 18 months ago, and absolutely coincidental that it now applied to every system within 50 light-years of hegemony space. Meanwhile, the Crystalline Collective had developed sudden concerns about the ethical implications of selling rare earth minerals to governments with questionable humanitarian records. The fact that this policy change occurred simultaneously across 43 different mining operations was surely just an example of remarkable philosophical synchronization. But the real artistry began when the humans activated what Captain Mallory had casually mentioned as the Adelaide Protocol. Zorain had never heard of the Adelaide Protocol, which should have been his first warning. He'd spent decades cataloging human contingency plans, from their relatively straightforward Operation Cleanup, economic warfare, to their deeply unsettling Project Midnight Garden, something involving weaponized terraforming that made senior diplomats require sedation when briefed on the details. The Adelaide Protocol, as it turned out, was named after a human philosopher who had once observed that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make them irrelevant. The humans had apparently taken this advice to heart and spent the better part of 30 years preparing to make any hostile civilization completely, utterly, and permanently irrelevant. They started with the hegemony's allies. The Corvan Republic received a comprehensive intelligence briefing detailing exactly how the Vossians had been manipulating Corvan trade negotiations for the past decade. The briefing included audio recordings, financial transaction logs, and a helpful analysis of how much the deception had cost Corvan taxpayers. The Threnodi Empire discovered that their mutual defense pact with the hegemony contained some remarkably creative loopholes, all of which had been helpfully highlighted in a legal analysis that appeared simultaneously on every major news network in Threnodi space. The Nexus Confederacy found themselves in possession of detailed schematics for Vossian military installations, along with a polite note suggesting that perhaps they should reconsider their strategic partnerships with governments that kept such detailed invasion plans for Confederacy territory. Within a week, the Hegemony of Voss went from commanding a coalition of 12 allied governments to explaining to increasingly hostile former partners why they had been planning to betray, invade, or economically exploit every single one of them. "How long have they been planning this?" Velix asked, her voice carrying the sort of awe typically reserved for natural disasters or religious experiences. "Decades," Zorain replied, watching another Vossian ally formally withdraw from their mutual defense agreements. "They've been preparing for this exact scenario with every major power in the galaxy. Look at this." He gestured to a data stream showing human diplomatic activity over the past 20 years. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Careful relationship building, strategic information gathering, and the patient construction of a vast network of obligations, favors, and mutual interests that could be activated at a moment's notice. The humans hadn't just been maintaining galactic peace through intimidation. They'd been building the infrastructure to dismantle any civilization that threatened that peace, one carefully placed diplomatic mine at a time. But the true masterpiece was still to come. On day 10 of what historians would call the Vossian education, every single hegemony military vessel simultaneously experienced what their technical manuals described as cascading system failures. Not destruction, that would have been crude. Instead, their ships simply stopped working properly. Weapons systems developed targeting errors. Life support began consuming triple the normal power. Hyperspace drives started requiring 17 different authorization codes, and a formal environmental impact assessment before engaging. The Vossians found themselves commanding the galaxy's most expensive collection of barely functional space debris. They didn't attack the ships, Zorain realized, watching the technical reports flood in. They updated the software. Every Vossian vessel ran on systems that incorporated components from dozens of different manufacturers across the galaxy, and every single one of those manufacturers had received new security updates that were absolutely essential for maintaining system integrity, and definitely not designed to turn military hardware into expensive paperweights when activated by a specific signal. The humans had been playing a 30-year game of chess while everyone else was still learning the rules of checkers. Zorain began composing his final report as the Hegemony of Voss formally requested emergency mediation to discuss acceptable terms for addressing recent diplomatic complications. The galaxy's most peaceful species had just reminded everyone exactly why they were so peaceful. The complete dismantling of a galactic superpower, as it turned out, required surprisingly little actual violence. The Hegemony of Voss simply woke up one morning to discover they had become a historical footnote, with delusions of relevance. Their economy had evaporated overnight when every major financial institution simultaneously discovered irregularities in Vossian accounts that required immediate frozen assets pending investigation. Their military existed primarily as a collection of expensive museums showcasing primitive early millennium spacecraft design. Their government spent most of its time explaining to increasingly restless populations why basic services like interstellar communication and food distribution had become temporarily unavailable due to technical difficulties. Most impressively, the humans had accomplished this feat of civilizational surgery without firing a single shot, breaking a single law, or even raising their voices during diplomatic communications. They had simply made the Vossians irrelevant, then stepped back to watch entropy complete the job. Zorain submitted his final report 3 weeks after what he had diplomatically termed the recent unpleasantness in Sector 7G. The document ran to 437 pages, not including appendices, and could be summarized in a single sentence. Do not, under any circumstances, ever annoy the humans again. The Altarian High Command had responded with a formal directive updating their diplomatic protocols. The previous guideline, exercise extreme caution when dealing with human interests, had been replaced with treat human preferences as immutable laws of physics. Other governments had reached similar conclusions. The Corvan Republic established a new cabinet position, Secretary of Human Relations, whose sole responsibility was ensuring that nothing the Republic did could be interpreted as even mildly irritating to human sensibilities. The Crystalline Collective created an entire bureaucratic department dedicated to analyzing potential human emotional responses to proposed policies. The Threnodi Empire went further, establishing a shrine to the wisdom of human patience and declaring an annual day of gratitude for human restraint. But perhaps the most telling response came from the Mediation Authority, which quietly updated their conflict resolution procedures to include a new preliminary step. Verify that humans are not involved in any capacity before proceeding with standard mediation protocols. Captain Mallory, when asked by curious journalists about humanity's remarkable diplomatic success, had simply smiled and noted that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to help everyone understand why it was a problem in the first place. The Hegemony of Voss, meanwhile, had fragmented into 17 smaller governments, each desperately attempting to distance themselves from their predecessors' regrettable policy decisions. The largest of these successor states had formally apologized to humanity and established a memorial fund for the victims of New Aberdeen, though they were careful to note that they bore no responsibility for actions taken by the previous administration. The humans had graciously accepted these apologies with the same serene composure they displayed when discussing weather patterns, which somehow made the gesture infinitely more terrifying than any military victory parade. Zorain had requested a transfer to a nice, quiet posting monitoring trade disputes between the Dust Wanderers and some mineral-rich asteroids. His replacement would have the privilege of watching humanity return to its peaceful routine of agricultural development, cultural exchange, and the occasional breakthrough in theoretical physics that casually revolutionized galactic understanding of reality. The new ambassador would also have the privilege of remembering that this same peaceful, helpful, cheerfully cooperative species had just demonstrated their capacity to make an entire civilization cease to exist without technically harming anyone. As Zorain packed his personal belongings, he reflected on the elegant simplicity of the human approach to galactic relations. They didn't rule through fear. That would have required constant displays of force and the exhausting business of actually governing unwilling subjects. Instead, they ruled through the much more efficient method of making everyone genuinely grateful for human patience and deeply invested in maintaining it. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and the lesson was simple. Humans were the most peaceful species in known space, and they intended to keep it that way. After all, as one human philosopher had noted centuries ago, the best way to ensure peace is to make war so creatively devastating that everyone agrees it's simply not worth the risk. Zorain sealed his final diplomatic pouch and activated his transport beacon. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what other minor misunderstandings the humans had prepared contingencies for, then decided he was much happier not knowing. The galaxy had one law, and it had just been updated. Don't make humans angry, don't make them annoyed, and definitely don't give them a reason to be creative about problem solving. Some lessons, apparently, were worth learning the easy way.